part of the program, I'm going to introduce you Professor Ori Soltes, professor at Georgetown University. He's a great intellectual person whom I know in my life, one of the best ones. Welcome to our program, Ori.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Ali Bey.
Would you please introduce yourself with your own words before we start the program?
Well, as you know, my name is Ori Z. Soltes, and I teach at Georgetown University. I teach in the School for Foreign Service, which has a Center for Jewish Civilization. That's actually where I teach. And my courses tend to cover a lot of territory. I teach a course on Jewish and Christian and Muslim mysticism. I teach a course on Jewish and Christian and Muslim symbols and art. I teach a course on the Middle East. I teach a course on the beginnings of Judaism and Christianity. I teach a course on the relationship between Islam and Judaism, both conceptually and historically, and so on. So I cover kind of philosophy, theology, art history, politics. There has to be some Jewish connection because it's the Center for Jewish Civilization. And short of that, I do whatever I want.
Okay, great. So with your broad knowledge about philosophy, theology, religion, movements, etc., before we go into deep in the Hizmet movement, how did you get to know Hizmet?
Actually, I have a graduate student, a former graduate student to thank for that, because when you, Ali Bey, were still in Washington directing the Rumi Forum, there was a program at Georgetown that involved a number of Muslims, Christians, Jews in the administration, some faculty, in a discussion actually of death and the afterlife in these three traditions. And my graduate student said, well, I know a guy who can come talk about the Jewish view. So I came and made a presentation, which ended up having to go through 2 sessions. And that's how I met you. And I think my book on mysticism had just come out. So you offered to have Rumi Forum do a book signing with that book and the book on symbols. And I've never looked back. I've had a long-standing relationship with Rumi Forum and with Hizmet since that time.
Thank you. So since you know Hizmet for a long time, how do you define Hizmet? What are the distinctive features of Hizmet compared to other movements, jamaats, or communities?
Yeah. There are other movements with similar ideas, I suppose, but Hizmet, which as probably most people listening realize, is the Turkish word for service, is a movement which very distinctively does and doesn't just say. It doesn't only talk, it walks. So the range and variety of modes and ways in which Hizmet began by serving Turkey and spread out to really serve the world, over 170 countries, in order to help the world improve itself, to bring about world peace by way of education, by way of social services, by way of a host of different kinds of interfaith encounters that give people an opportunity to de-other the other. So I've never met a Muslim, I've never met a Baptist, I've never met a Jew, whatever it is, now I actually do. And there's an opportunity to not just very superficially meet people, but to get to know people. And Hizmet has been masterful over the years at developing programs which do all of that.
Great. So as the founder of the movement, Fethullah Gülen, our leader, what do you see at Fethullah Gülen? What are the distinctive features of Fethullah Gülen?
Yes, the way I will answer that question is interesting, because I don't believe I had heard of Hizmet at all before the Georgetown Rumi Forum encounter. And then obviously I became interested. And then at a certain point, you in fact suggested that I might consider writing a book about Gülen that connected to my own interest, particularly mysticism. And if you remember, I said, well, I can't do that just yet. And the reason was I didn't feel I knew anything about Fethullah Gülen at that point. And in the next year or so, I made it my business to read everything that I could find, both that he had written and things written about him, So I felt I had a really solid sense of who he was, who he is, where he was coming. He evolved as a thinker, as an actor, the pulpit in the mosque to a more secluded kind of academic position in which he was writing and in which he was still teaching, but by way of tapes and a small circle of followers. And it became very easy when I began to write my first book about him to do so. And it was about the relationship between his thinking particularly and that of Mevlana, of Rumi, the 13th century Sufi, but other thinkers as well. And it was a kind of combination of writing about him, about his thought, and the relationship between his thought and other things, and the relationship between his thought and the actions that it has promoted. I had not yet met him. And this is important. I talked in a lot of different places across the country. I actually talked when it was still possible for me to go to Turkey, in Turkey after that book came out. And at a certain point, there were two things that I had asked for. One, but I waited, was to meet him. And the other was to attend one of the week-long retreats that in different parts of the Hizmet world take place in December. And I was able to do both of that and both of those things. And here's the outcome. My travels around the Hizmet world and my participation in that retreat confirmed in fact on the ground what I felt in theory from what I had read, which is that people involved in Hizmet are really involved in Hizmet, in service. There is one person among all the hundreds of people I've met in Hizmet about whom I would say, this person is selfish, this person has brought me in to speak, but he doesn't think about me. He's worrying about himself. But that's good that there's one person, because if there was nobody, then it would seem surreal. But aside from that one individual, I have consistently found this pattern of what can we do for you? How can we help? How can we make the world a better place? Then I met Gülen himself, Hoca Efendi himself, and a movie star, a sports star, someone, a celebrity of that sort. And then you meet that person and you're so disappointed because they turn out to be a jerk and not the person you thought because of the public face. When I met Gülen, it was exactly the opposite. As much as I was inclined to respect him based on what I had read, again, by him and about him, I was overwhelmed by him. The combination of a unique kind of warmth and a genuine humility. And I emphasize the word genuine because I have in my life, I'm sure you have as well, met plenty of people who they pretend, oh, I'm just so humble. And really that humility is is a mask for, in fact, a very large ego. With Gülen, it was not that at all. It was it was a genuine humility. And that first meeting, which I've never obviously forgotten, I have been back to visit him 3 or 4 times since then. And every time that initial impression has been reconfirmed and reconfirmed. So when one speaks about his leadership, it's a combination of a kind of charisma, a kind of humility, a kind of generosity, and I think this is very important, he doesn't tell you what you should be doing. He doesn't tell Hizmet people, you know, I think you should do that. You can ask his advice and maybe he might give it, but for the most part, he wants you to think about what you should be doing. He wants you to think in terms of the kinds of principles that he has spent a lifetime teaching and preaching and writing about, but he wants you to figure out what you need to be doing to be part of a process that is helping to improve the world. And I think that's enormously important because, again, that's the distinction between his kind of leadership and a kind of egocentric leadership that demands everybody do it as I do it. Everybody pay attention to what I am saying. Everyone follow my lead. He doesn't do that. You cannot resist him, but not because he's insistent. It's because he's irresistible.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for this important definition of both Hizmet and Hoca Efendi, Fethullah Gülen. Maybe you are aware that there's a big purge going on in Turkey right now, and
Ah,
atrocities, oppression against Hizmet people. And inside and outside of Turkey, people are trying to do something. And based on your knowledge and also big experience about the movements, about the religions, and about the groups, how do you see the future of Hizmet? And how
yeah,
do you define this purge period?
yes. Let me begin by saying that the very first moment I heard about the July 2017 fake, excuse me, so-called false coup, I did not believe it was false. I have consistently said it was not false, it was fake, that the man behind it was Erdogan himself. And this is not the time to go into all the details of why I'm remain convinced of that. But clearly that was a turning point in his attempts to destroy Gülen and to destroy Hizmet. And I understand very well where that's coming from. It reminds me, if you will forgive the parallel, of the obsession that Donald Trump has with Barack Obama. Obama, who is everything that Trump is not. And it's as if every time he looks in the mirror, he sees Obama's face and it just terrifies him. And I feel the same is true of Erdogan, who pretends to be a pious Muslim, and everything about him makes it clear that he is an exemplar not of piety, but of shirk on all levels. And Gülen is that mirror that every time he sees Gülen, it's what he never will be, and Gülen is. And so it's a visceral distaste for him and everything associated with him. So I understand where he's coming from. I despise it, but that's how it is. And he has managed, as I don't have to tell you, to subvert the democracy of Turkey and turn it into an autocracy, taking control and command of all the different branches of government and so on and so forth, the media. This, by now, people, if they don't know, should realize. Because what it also means, the media also means that, let's say in the United States, about what's happening in Turkey or what's happening vis-a-vis the Hizmet movement in and beyond Turkey is coming through Erdogan sources and is, needless to say, far from objective. Particularly since then, my participation at that retreat, for example, came after that point, having watched Hizmet continue to evolve in spite of being eviscerated in Turkey itself. And you understand, again, I'm preaching to the choir here, Erdogan shutting down of all those schools in Turkey where they are most needed for Turkey's sake is symptomatic, of course, of his lack of concern for Turkey and his primary concern being only for himself and his own power. That the silver lining in this cloud, I think, is that Hizmet has, in a fundamental way, kind of had to think harder about itself, reinvent the ways in which it continued to do the things it had always been doing, but it had always been doing it in a certain sense with a kind of cushion because of Gülen's charisma, because of his ability, going back to when he was just an imam in a mosque in Izmir, to gain support of middle and upper middle class businessmen far beyond what would otherwise have been their level of zakat in other circumstances, so that he could build schools, so that he could develop social programs. That cushion, of course, has been considerably deflated by what Erdogan has managed to do. Not completely erased, but deflated so that members of the Hizmet movement have to think even harder about how can we do what we're doing? How can we manage not just to hold the status quo, but to expand our educational, our outreach, our social, all those kinds of programs, our various interfaith connections. I'm involved in a number of those here in the Washington area, in which I see Rumi Forum as a major mover among these various organizations from Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Sikhism, who are interested, but Rumi is really at the forefront. So I'm hoping and expecting that Hizmet's future is actually bright. If inshallah, we reach a point where Erdogan will be gone, then Hizmet will be positioned to even be more successful back in Turkey, in it with its roots and in general. Alas, the day will come also when Hoca Efendi will be gone. And that's the big challenge to Hizmet, to consider how they will operate in the aftermath of his leadership when he is not personally there. But I think from what I've seen, the Hizmet people are up to it. And there are people who stand out in different ways. I mean, people like you, or like Emre Celik, or like Ibrahim Ali here in Washington, who are leaders in the ways in which you're leaders, but then there are also people like Enes Kanter, the NBA basketball star, who has not hesitated to use his fame, really, to promote the things. He doesn't promote Hizmet, he promotes the things that Hizmet does, and to push back against the lies that Mr. Erdogan has his media spewing out. So I don't think it's going to be an easy future, but I think it's going to be a bright future. And I think it's going to be a powerful future.
Great. Thank you so much for this insightful, very informative information and your thought about the Hizmet movement future based on actually the characteristics of the followers and the leader Fethullah Gülen. So these are very informative. Thank you. Before closing, would you like to add something?
Just that I have to say it has been a pleasure for 15 years to be associated with Hizmet and all that it does. It's a source of pride for me. And by the way, if you don't mind my lack of humility, I have a second book coming out on Hoca Efendi. It's a kind of intellectual biography. And for it, I interviewed about 80 different people at different levels. A few of his very old friends who go back to middle school with him, to people like myself, who are not Turkish, who are not Muslim, who are not therefore formally within Hizmet, but are very much associated with it. And the questions that I asked them all were the same simple questions. How did you hear about it? What do you think about Mr. Gülen? What do you think about Hizmet? Do you have criticisms? Are there improvements you would make? And, you know, I finished this book about, I don't remember, maybe over a year ago. And things moved slowly. The editors at Blue Dome Press took a while and then came back to me with a number of suggestions, criticisms, comments. So I reread it. And as I wrote to my editor, you know, in rereading all those interviews, I am once again impressed with and just taken by the positive effect that Hizmet has had on so many people in so many different directions.
Oh, great.
And hopefully the book will be out in a couple of months.
We look forward to seeing it, and maybe after that you'll make another program. Maybe after COVID-19,
that would be wonderful.
We can make signature, book signature meeting or gathering. Okay, thank you so much for this conversation, very friendly and frank conversation. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, Ali Bey. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.